Good afternoon, everybody. As we have reached starting time, so we have enough box seats for everybody. So take your places. The Health and Wellness Committee is pleased to sponsor the final installment in our 2025 Late Life Planning Series, captioned Chaplain Services. And we are pleased to have both of our chaplains here today making a formal presentation. And if you're in the front row, you might be included on the tape that is currently being made. And we will introduce Lin Walton, Director of Pastoral Care, who will lead the discussion, followed by a Q&A session. And thank you all for attending. And feel free to make comments as to how we can improve our offerings next year. And we would be remiss if we didn't have our advertisement. The Health and Wellness Committee is always welcomes people who are like-minded and willing to do a little work with us. Thank you. And here's Lynn.
Thank you, David, and thank you to everybody on the Health and Wellness Committee who has begun these presentations. I think did you say, Dave? I think we're in our third year now. And there may be a little bit of repeat. David asked if I would do a little bit on the history of the program of pastoral care, what we used to call pastoral care, now spiritual life here at Deerfield. And then another very important piece of it is to turn things over to our chaplain, Betsy, and she will do her own piece on planning memorial services and planning memorial events that are a little bit different than services, which you see more and more here at Deerfield. So at the end, as David said, we are happy to take questions, anything that we didn't cover, but also please ask questions along the way. So I always hope that there are a few people, at least, who are attending for the first time and maybe don't even really know about the history of pastoral care at Deerfield or of St. Giles or of the chapels that we have on campus, because there's more than one. As you can see, this is a beautiful picture of St. Giles Chapel as it presently is, but it wasn't always quite this way. This is St. Giles, a depiction of St. Giles, for whom that chapel has been named. And not everybody knows the, if you will, if I could put it this way, the legend of St. Giles. So for me, in a way, he was the St. Francis before there was a St. Francis. So 6th century, 7th century, living in France, and was a hermit. And you see up behind him, there's a cave. And as the legend goes, he would retreat to this cave where he would devote himself to prayer and other spiritual practices. But the king's hunters came along, and they were pursuing this deer that you see here, and the deer fled into the cave. And the hunters began shooting arrows into the cave, trying to get the deer, and Giles took the arrow instead. So intentionally took the arrow so the deer wouldn't be harmed. And from there, Giles became the patron saint of not only animals like the deer, but of all creatures, including humans, particularly those who are vulnerable. And that includes those who are aging. And so that's why Giles was chosen as the saint for whom they would name the chapel, and at that time, the entire program, really. So, and then from there, of course, there's a connection to Deerfield, which I'm getting a little bit off track, but if you don't know, Deerfield was actually not named because there used to be a lot of deer on the property, although there, I'm sure, always were. but actually the original family that donated the property to the Episcopal Diocese of Western North Carolina, that Timpson family was from Deerfield, Illinois. And this was their summer residence, and that's why it's come to be called Deerfield. And so here's as it originally looked after it began to be built out. And you can see the chapel all the way up in the corner there of what was affectionately known as the Square Donut. And some of you have seen these pictures recently from archive presentations. And then when they underwent expansion, they actually picked up that original chapel and moved it over, and if you will, wedded it to the Timpson house. And if you've been to the chapel recently, there's that large foyer area, or narthex as we call it, and that's the joining of the two, the original chapel and the original house. And I think the important part about that is to say that the chapel program and a commitment to pastoral care of all Deerfield residents has been a part of Deerfield's mission from the very beginning. And of course, this is the inside of St. Giles, very much renovated from what it originally was, given a little bit more Gothic architecture. One of the most beautiful things that has come from it is the sound. If you've been in St. Giles Chapel, there are amazing acoustics. That was not a part of anybody's thought when it was picked up and moved. It wasn't a part of it when it was the chapel originally, and wasn't even something that they were designing for when they moved it over to where it was, but just as sort of a godly gift. But we have a second chapel on campus, and that is what we now call Grace Chapel down in the skilled nursing unit, and that's for residents who really can't get out to their places of worship any longer. And so it was specifically built for those residents, but all residents are now welcome. Much more modern feel. It was actually designed by one of our current residents. Well, they're not residents any longer, they've both passed, but he designed the chapel for us. He was an architect by trade. And then finally, I just wanted to point out this beautiful temple bell. I think I got a better shot, a Japanese temple bell that is in the Memorial Garden behind St. Giles. That was donated to us by the Flynn family. So Emmy Flynn is still a resident here at Deerfield. Her husband, Alan, used to be the headmaster of a school in Rhode Island. And when he retired, somehow the school had come into possession of this Japanese temple bell, and they gave it to Alan upon his retirement. They brought it to North Carolina, and then when Alan passed, Emmy donated it to St. Giles. The bell alone, but we decided if we were going to receive this gift, then we would hang it in proper fashion and even make it so it could be used, and sometimes it is, when we are burying ashes in the Memorial Garden. And other people come by all the time and ring it and say their own prayers. And so it's really become a very prominent feature. But the reason I showed it specifically today is to say it was a gift to the chapel. And I did want to remind folks that the chapel program, or spiritual life at Deerfield, as we now call it, is entirely self-supporting. So every year you get that same letter that asks, would you make a contribution, a gift, a pledge to the program for the upcoming year? Sometimes it could be a gift like this. That's a little extraordinary. Other times it's a monetary gift. But it is, the entire program is self-supporting, and it's only possible because of you all and your generosity. And somehow, even though our budget goes up every year, somehow the donations keep coming, and we are incredibly thankful for what you all do and make possible. One of my favorite features is the pond down there, another place that's very popular for folks to visit in the Memorial Garden. And then there are the names. This is a picture from a couple of years ago. And I do want to thank Peter Ray has taken quite a few of these pictures, and I've taken quite a few myself. And then a few years ago, probably been 6 or 7 now, we had some residents who said, well, what if we're not a part of the chapel? What if we're not Episcopal? What if we're not even Christian or particularly religious? Is there a place for us in the Memorial Garden? Up until that time, there really hadn't been. And so a small committee got together, Jack Lockett, Susan White, and Susan Bolton, who's no longer with us, one of our Jewish residents, got together and put together a plan, and we worked on it with the chapel committee, and they decided on this quote. And it comes from an Indian author, Tagore Rabindranath, who was the first winner of the Nobel Prize for Literature outside of the Western world. And you can see, and when my voice is silent in death, my song will speak in your living heart. And at this point, I think I will turn things over to Betsy, and she will talk a little bit about what comes before the burial of ashes.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm going to grab a music stand really quickly. So I want to echo what Lin finished with saying, which is that he and I and the Spiritual Life Department here at Deerfield are for all Deerfield residents. You do not have to identify as a Christian, identify as religious. You might be stoutly in the spiritual but not religious camp. Or you might say, I don't believe in anything beyond what I can see with my eyes in the physical world. That does not mean that there is not space for spiritual life and for the chaplains that serve this community in your life. Our job is to walk with you wherever you find yourself on your journey, however you understand your journey. The fact that we happen to be Episcopal priests does not and should not impact our ability to be present to you on your journey. I don't know that we will ever be able to reiterate that enough. You don't ever have to darken the door of either one of our chapels. You don't have to go to church someplace else off campus. We are your chaplains. And there is always a time when all of us need someone to walk with us through hardship, through difficulty, and that's what we do. One of the hard things that Lin and I do is we walk with people as they are in the process of dying, and we walk with people as their loved ones are in the process of dying. That's what I want to talk with you about today. But I do want to reiterate that a lot of the work we do happens before anyone dies. The stuff that it's easiest to see us doing is the funeral planning and all of that, all of the facilitating that comes after a resident has died. But a lot of what we do on a day-to-day basis is actually showing up for people as they are struggling with whatever life throws at you. And so that is a piece of what we do. But today, end-of-life planning. There are some important things for you to know. Number one, every single person is important enough to have their life celebrated after they die. The caveat to that, or maybe the 1A, is that when you die, whatever comes afterwards, whatever happens, whatever sort of celebration or honoring happens for you, it is about you, but it's not for you. Because funerals, memorials, celebrations are actually for the living. We are a people who need symbol and ritual to mentally be able to continue living in the world. And when we honor somebody who has died, it helps to close a chapter of our life and allows our brains to better see the path moving forward. It says, we did this thing. It came to a culmination in the celebration of them, or within the Episcopal Church, having a ritual funeral that has communion. For every person, it's different. But for each one of you, it is important to find some way to honor your time and your presence in this world. Because you're worth honoring, and the people who love you and are your friends and your loved ones deserve an opportunity to celebrate the impact you had on your life. More and more people, I believe, are putting off or ignoring doing anything altogether. And I think some of us do that because we think, oh, it's a pain. I wasn't that special. I don't want people to have to travel. I don't want to make a big fuss. Well, guess what? We should all have some sort of fuss made over us at the end of our lives. It is because all of us are worthy of it. And your family and friends deserve to get to celebrate the goodness that is your life. So, there are lots of options for celebrating. And last year I was maybe just under a year in. Now I'm almost 2 years in. And in the last year, I've done a lot more creative celebrations. And actually, in the coming month, we'll have 2 more very creative celebrations. There is not any single way to do. You can celebrate however you want. That can be a full church service, funeral. In the Episcopal Church, we call it burial of the dead. That's the liturgy, with communion, with hymns, with singing, with 150 people. Or you can gather in the Riverwalk Cafe with finger food and drinks and raise a toast. Both of those things honor you. And you and your families get to decide what's the best way to honor you. Pre-planning, allowing some of the decisions to be made by you, allows your family and those you leave behind to have more space to grieve in the acute period of grief that happens when you die. Grief, and one of the main things I say to residents here at Deerfield after they have experienced a loss is that grief is incredibly exhausting. It is very tiring to just function in grief. And when we are grieving, there's also this checklist of things that has to happen, all of these pragmatic considerations that we need to think about. When we can remove some of those checklist items and just give to our family something that says, this is me, this is how I would like to be remembered, that allows them the space to feel the weight of the grief at your passing. And that weight's going to be there no matter what, because they will be sad at your passing. There will be a great exhaustion that comes with it. So giving them that gift is incredibly helpful for them as they try to walk through the process. Some of the options that we have at Deerfield, and this is in no way limited, it is only limited by the creativity of the people who have come before you, right? If you want to do something super creative, we are happy to sit down and talk with you about what you would like to do. But these are some of your options. And for those of you who have grabbed papers, I am just looking at the first paper that was up on the table up there. So you can do a traditional funeral. You might already be a part of a church community here in Asheville or in Brevard or in Hendersonville, and you are always welcome. to have your service at your church home. All we ask is that we know that that's where you're going to have it, so that we can make sure to communicate that to the community, so the community can go to that church and participate in the funeral if they would like. You'll see right now on the memorial table, Sandra Wright is having a funeral next week at St. Lawrence. She was Catholic, she wanted a Catholic service, and all I said to her daughter was, I am excited that she gets what she wants. That will be meaningful for her. But there might be people here who want to go, so please let us know so that we can advertise it. So, if you have a church community, that's great. Put the information on one of the forms, because Lynn or I will reach out to the church. Make sure that if there's anything that we can do to connect dots for that church, that we can do that. But we got to know what your church home is. We can also have a traditional funeral memorial service celebration of life here. We can do it down in Grace Chapel, or we can have it over at St. Giles. The easiest way to explain that sort of funeral is generally the funerals you go to here are usually pretty traditional. If you don't have a faith tradition that you want to use, I will always offer up the Episcopal liturgy because it's great. It's actually one of our greatest evangelism tools. People come to the Episcopal Church for funerals and they're like, that was amazing. And I'm like, well, you should see the rest of the liturgy. Like, if you liked that. So it works very well. If you are a Christian, the Episcopal liturgy works very well. But if you want something different, we are happy to work with you on the format of what that will look like. Usually a traditional funeral looks like hymns or music of some sort, scripture readings, a eulogy, usually having somebody who knows you get up and speak, and then having myself or Lynn or a pastor from another congregation get up and speak, and then prayers, maybe some more music. And then depending on where you will be buried, the service might continue out to the memorial garden, or it might finish, right? So that is a pretty traditional funeral service. You can do a non-traditional funeral as well. I have two coming up in May. Both people, one passed without any real sense of what he wanted. The other passed after I had spoken with her and we had gotten a couple of things. And so this is where creativity comes in. Both of them were not Christians. They don't, aside from the one, he wants a couple of kind of praise songs, but he doesn't want any scripture or anything like that. Then we start finding out what it is that really lit your fire, right? Brings joy to your soul. And how do we use that joy and reflect it in a service? There's a lot of creativity. And I would say the only boundaries that we really set are secular music. We need to be mindful of what type of secular music we use, right? Because we want to honor and respect. And some music does that better than others. And if there are body songs, right, that maybe don't work in worship, we invite them to be used at a reception, right? If you've got 20 people who want to speak, we're probably going to say, that's a lot of people. I'm not sure it's going to go the way you want it to go. What about having a reception where there's an open mic where people can tell stories? I will say in terms of having people speak, it is always helpful because as long as you have been here, you have not been here your whole life. I've been here less than 2 years. Lynn has been here 10 years, so he knows you better than I do. But still, that's only 10 years of your life. Having somebody who can speak about your whole life is wonderful. It means a great deal to me because, again, it is a way of honoring your whole life. That said, having somebody talk about you for 20 minutes is really long, Okay. So what I always encourage people is, I will say, number one, if you would like to get up and say something, write it down. That way, if the person who gets up gets overwhelmed by emotion, somebody else can step in and can read the words on the page. It also helps to keep the time limit. And I will say, if you can't say it in 5 minutes about this person, then you probably need to do a second or third draft, because we want to be honoring of you. We don't want to be held hostage by stories about your life, even though they're all wonderful stories. And again, receptions are great places for that. So that leads into the third option, which is, and this is happening more and more at Deerfield, people are not having formal services. They are having what we would call a party or a reception or a gathering. We had one yesterday in the Canterbury room. We had about 80 people show up to celebrate Ruth Miller. And Esther and I, we spoke about what she wanted it to look like. I helped facilitate that. And then we spoke about what the spoken part was going to be. If you are going to have some sort of party reception gathering, it is best to have a couple of minutes that are formal, or somebody's holding a microphone and is saying something. Yesterday, all I did was welcome everybody, read Ruth's obituary, and then Esther did about 5 minutes on stories of Ruth, and then I closed by thanking everyone for being there. We don't have to reinvent the wheel, but again, it is that having intentionality about honoring you, about the reason why we gather. Because we're not just gathering for finger food and cocktails or yesterday ice cream sandwiches. We are gathering to remember and honor. And so having a few minutes in which we get to do that, I think is really important. The other thing to note is that we have had a few people do music concerts here on campus. And I think that is a beautiful way of honoring and celebrating someone's life. The sticky detail in that is that Lynn and I aren't responsible for finding the musicians. So if that is something that you are really interested in doing, now is the time to start casting the net for who you would like to have be the musician to come in. We are happy to facilitate the use of space, and again, an opening and a closing, but when it goes outside of kind of our day-to-day purview, that then starts to rest on y'all. I'm going to stop there. Actually, no, if you look down at the bottom, there is, under formats, the 3 personal creation, the gathering. There are a couple of things just to highlight there. You do need to think about where you will hold a gathering. There are a lot of great spaces here on campus. And again, Lynn and I can help facilitate getting you in contact with the people who manage those spaces. But Lynn and I only manage Grace Chapel and St. Giles Chapel. And so when we start talking about having receptions, the focus being a reception, we start getting dining involved. And we then can tell you, well, you need to contact Emily Tate, right? Emily can help organize that, make sure there's space, talk with you about food and such things. And we are always happy to have memorabilia, photos, videos. If we are doing a formal funeral, those will be out in the narthex usually, or in the activity room down in Grace. They are not part of the service. They are in addition to. But we're always happy to make sure tables are set up, easels are available, those sorts of things. So I do think that, moving on to the second page, this is a really important piece of paperwork for you to have, because I would say 95% of the residents that I have walked through the funeral process with were surprised by the things that spiritual life takes care of when a funeral is going to be planned. And you can see kind of down where those bullet points are. Number one, the use of the chapel. We keep the chapel available. Mostly St. Giles, but we work with activities down in skilled nursing for the use of grace. Funerals tend to trump everything else that's happening in that space except for Sunday morning worship. So we will work with you to find a time that works for you and perhaps your family coming in to make that available. When you have a formal funeral or a formal celebration memorial service, we provide the altar flowers. That is just part of what we do. If you have a funeral on a Saturday, we will just have the flowers show up early for Sunday, right? But if you have a midweek service on a Wednesday, we will make sure to order flowers for the service in either one of the chapels. That's just one of those things that is part of you being a Deerfield resident. You also, there is no extra fee for Lynn and I to do the planning, to lead the service, and for our organist, usually Stuart, for the next couple of weeks, though, Linda as well. You don't owe us anything more. That is part of being a Deerfield resident. When you give us honorarium, which we always appreciate but do not expect, honorarium either go into our discretionary account or into, if you don't make it to the discretionary account, it goes into the sabbatical account for the chaplains. So that when we have put a number of years in and can take a sabbatical, we have some extra resources available for us to go on sabbatical. And then this is the one that always surprises folks, that Spiritual Life will put on a light reception for after the service. So if you have a funeral afterwards, we will put on, usually we have 3 or 4 finger trays of food, some drinks, and usually Pat Collette is the one who oversees all of that. As long as she gets the information, she communicates it to Deerfield, she sets it up, she takes it down. But it is a way to, have some socializing afterwards, to make sure that family and friends feel welcomed and invited, that we're being hospitable. And that's just part of it. If you want a really big reception with shrimp on ice, we can again give you Emily Tate's contact information. But we are happy to put on just a regular reception. And I think the receptions are generally wonderful. Very received well. There's usually a lot of food. We always have a lot of food left over. So, a couple of other details, mostly which I put on the back table. If you have not filled out an application for the memorial garden and you would like to be buried, have your ashes buried at the memorial garden, this is the easiest way to pre-plan. Fill this out. Write a check and drop it off with us. That way, we already know what's going to happen. Also, there are 2 forms back there. One says funeral memorial services and burial instructions. This is kind of our go-to form if you're not sure what you want. It asks all of the important questions for us to have, for us to follow up with family, and super easy to fill out. If you would like help in filling out any of these forms, I am and Lynn are happy to help you make an appointment and help you fill them out. For those of you who identify as Christian, there is a form back there if you want scripture readings. Not knowing where to start can be really overwhelming. So this is basically an idea sheet of good scripture passages that work well for a funeral. On the other side of it are good hymns that work well. This does come from the Episcopal hymnal, but a lot of the hymns are the same in the Presbyterian and Methodist and probably some Baptist churches as well. And then finally, if you are a devout Episcopalian and you know you're going to have an Episcopal funeral, there is an extra sheet back there. This has just some liturgical info that is helpful for us to fill if you know you want an Episcopal funeral. It kind of walks step by step through the process of that sort of funeral. You do not need to fill it out. Again, it is for people who really like the Episcopal liturgy, and it allows us to know some of the details. Some of us are church nerds and are really into that sort of thing. So I am happy to answer any questions after Lin's portion of the presentation. I hope that was helpful. Thank you.
Thank you, Betsy. That was very helpful. Outstanding presentation. I just wanted to quickly highlight something that Betsy has already said. We are as interested in your quality of life here at Deerfield as much as we are the end of life. And so that's sort of a different presentation. But sometimes I explain it by saying, when I was a young priest just coming out of seminary, oftentimes we are given at that point pastoral care duties, and I was visiting somebody in the hospital. Sometimes we're given those folks who maybe haven't been the closest to the parish recently, have fallen away a little bit. And this was in Washington, D.C. area. And went to the hospital and visited this older gentleman. He had sort of fallen away from the church, career, retired military officer. And when it kind of came to that time, I asked him, well, would you like me to pray for you? And he thought about it for a moment, and he said, well, yes, Father Lin, if it'll make you feel better. Well, prayer does make me feel better. But it doesn't have to be a part of what we do. Sometimes medication makes me feel better, if I could put it that way, especially pain medication. And so another thing, I guess you could say prayer perhaps is that religious part of our being that some of us engage in. But then there is a whole spirit side of us as well. And as Betsy said, some of us identify as being spiritual but not religious. Maybe the prayer isn't for everyone. But what is for everyone, as Betsy said, is good, responsible care, faithful care. And a lot of what we do at the hospital is care for you by being your best advocate. So this is not quite the presentation for it. It's a whole separate presentation, but I cannot tell you how many times I've gone to the hospital, a resident is there, they've fallen, broken their shoulder or something else, and I will arrive, Betsy will arrive, and 45 minutes later, as soon as we can, but sometimes it takes a little while, and they have not been given any pain medication at all. As soon as we arrive, suddenly nurses come out of nowhere. Now, what's the explanation for that? Is it really ageism or some kind of discrimination or neglect? Well, I think they're just overworked. And as that kind of that patient to-do list that they're looking at and trying to figure out who to attend to, what to do first, somehow, oftentimes without a good advocate, unfortunately, people kind of don't get the care that they deserve. And that's our job, is to make sure that you get the care you deserve. We can't save everybody up at the hospital, but we've got our folks, and we take that seriously. So that's a part of what we offer before the end of life. But let me return to kind of the theme of the day. This is a shot from the Memorial Garden. But I want to talk about, as Betsy went through all the different memorial service practices and alternative practices that are coming to be used more and more these days, I want to go through and talk to you very candidly about different burial practices because there are alternatives there as well. And there are some good reasons to think about alternatives to traditional full body burial and also even to cremation. As you know, when a body is cremated, it takes an incredible amount of energy to complete that process, and what is put into the environment is not always what people want. Today, about 60% of Americans will be cremated. That is right now the way most residents at Deerfield choose to have their bodies, if you will, disposed of. But there are some alternatives that are starting to be used more and more. One of my favorites is people can become a part of coral reefs. So it does require cremation, but then those remains are mixed with cement and other things, and you can pay to have your ashes included in an artificial reef and taken to not just Florida anymore, but it really goes all the way up the East Coast now. I assume they can do it on the West Coast as well. So that's an alternative practice that is possible for those who would like to choose it. Another one, as you may have heard, is again, I'm just going to be completely straightforward with you and not beat around the bush or the tree in this case. There is now something called tree pod burial, and a full body can be included in the root bulb of a tree and planted, although not in North Carolina. So that would be a much more expensive option. And I forgot to tell you that that being a part of the coral reef is anywhere between $4,000 and $9,000 for those who are interested. The tree pod burial is about $3,500 to start, but because it's not available in North Carolina, there would be more involved in getting a body to a state where they do such things, the closest being New York State to North Carolina. But there is something also called human composting that is possible today, and that is where the body over I think it's a 45-day period, is reduced to compost. And again, this is not available in North Carolina yet. There are advocacy groups working on it. It also is the closest option is New York, but compost can be sent back to the family, or it can be donated to conservation groups who are trying to restore environmentally degraded areas. So new tree planting projects could use this compost. This is a particular favorite of mine only because in a world where topsoil, which is so critical to growth, is washing into the rivers that you can just see in the French Broad every time it rains, and into the ocean, causing all kinds of problems in and of itself there, plus for those of us in the mountains or other areas where we need to continue to do farming and agriculture, having compost is a really valuable resource. And that compost could actually be brought back here to the Memorial Garden and used there as well. So that's kind of a cutting edge option that we're sort of looking at. This is a little bit more lighthearted, but did you know that you could also be turned into a vinyl record? So perhaps, I'm just saying, Led Zeppelin's Stairway to Heaven might be a good option. Leonard Cohen, Alleluia, all kinds of good options. Not one of my favorites, but it is possible now. Again, though, it would require cremation. And then finally, well, I've got two more. This is a really nice option. This is a picture of the Carolina Sanctuary, Memorial Sanctuary, and it's out in Mills River. And Stephen usually attends these sessions, but he's doing another session right now that he was asked to do, reading poetry. But he had a friend who died of cancer, died at home, and when she died, Kathy, Stephen and other friends wrapped her body in a shroud, put it into one of their cars, and drove it out to the Carolina Sanctuary, where a burial spot was already prepared. They placed the ground in the body. They placed the body in the ground. It was covered over, and it was as simple as that. That is legal in North Carolina. And if you were interested in something like that, it would be about $5,000 at this point. Just to know, this beautiful area, again, right out in Mills River, is getting crowded already. And so I think they are already starting to search for another place to continue on with the practice, but finding land in Mills River is not easy these days, or at least not affordable in that way. Lots of folks here at Deerfield do donate their bodies to science, and I think that's a wonderful thing to do. Different parts of me, I'm an organ donor, and if I suddenly die, have an accident, various parts of me will go off and be used for good things. I fully believe in it, but please remember, it is not always an option for people who have, if I could say, grown older. I'm sorry to have to say it, but that's just... And so make sure you're up to date with those arrangements, because at some point, the university won't be able to use your body any longer. And then it becomes a little bit tricky, because then we have to figure out with nursing on the spot, what's the alternative? But just be aware. And then finally, I did want to highlight what is available right here in North Carolina is something called aquamation. And so, as you know, the human body is mostly comprised of water. And when a person dies, their body can be put into this chamber, filled with water and a sodium and potassium compound, and the body returned to water again, and bones. And those bones are become dry, and they're put under heat, and they become a very fine dust, even much finer than cremains. And so those that fine dust then can be returned to the family and could be included in the memorial garden here at St. Giles, or as other families choose. So aquamation can be done in North Carolina. Let me try and find that right here. It can even be done or arranged through Gross Funeral Home, which is just down the street, for about $3,600. And that, as you can imagine, is an environmentally more friendly option. If you were interested, it's something that became very popularized because Archbishop Desmond Tutu chose to have his body handled in that way. And then finally, again, if I haven't already said, Peter Ray took a lot of pictures for us, a few myself, in the memorial garden. And of course, you can imagine I wanted to end there because I love the memorial garden and I'm quite proud of it. And we really have developed it in the 10 years that I've been here. When I first arrived, it really was almost so overgrown that you could hardly walk through it. You had to kind of duck down and weave your way through. And we did all kinds of things to get it cleaned up, and then also all the enhancements that we've made to the point now where we hire our own gardener at the chapel to look after the memorial garden because Deerfield just can't keep up with it with all the other duties that they have, making this campus so beautiful. So again, if you see Peter Ray, thank him for a lot of these beautiful shots. I kind of include this one as a way of saying the Memorial Garden is far from being only a place for those who are being laid to rest. There's lots of life there, and people go down to meditate and to pray and to, perhaps most importantly of all, to remember. And then finally, because of our former chaplain, Tanya Hill, there is a pet area in the Memorial Garden as well that St. Francis looks over. That's kind of down at the bottom if you haven't had a chance to visit. And I just wanted to end, I know we're getting close, with this poem from Mary Oliver. And it's titled, Sleeping in the Forest. I thought the earth remembered me. She took me back so tenderly, arranging her dark skirts, her pockets full of lichens and seeds. I slept as never before, a stone on the riverbed, nothing between me and the white fire of the stars, but my thoughts. And they floated light as moths among the branches of the perfect trees. All night I heard small kingdoms breathing around me, the insects and the birds who do their work in the darkness. All night I rose and fell as if in water, grappling with a luminous doom. But by morning, I had vanished at least a dozen times into something better. I hope that's what the Memorial Garden is for all those who choose to be laid to rest there. So any questions for either of us? I think Betsy's still got a mic with her that's live. Anything at all that you wanted to ask?
And
Lynn and Betsy, one thing you haven't mentioned are the remains of the remains. In other words, how many of us here have artificial joints, and what happens to those after the aquamation or preparing for a coral reef or whatever?
That is a great question. Again, I love it. I think Betsy does when people choose to have their ashes included in the memorial garden, but it does require cremation. And cremation, that's one of the problems, that those things are, if you will, left over, or if they're made of plastic, they will go into the air and the environment upon burning. Some things that are left that won't burn, although it is at an excess of 3,000 degrees. So I would need one of our chemists to tell me what burns at that temperature and what doesn't.
I don't know about North Carolina, but I had a family member die in Minnesota, and he had hips, knees, and at least one shoulder, and was cremated. And the way I understand it with the metal is that upon being cremated, the metal is laying in the furnace, and usually the people who work at the crematorium remove those pieces, and I think actually recycle them. And the reason why I say that is because a family member of mine asked for all of the metal from her father's joints, and was going to use it to like make jewelry or something. And the funeral home was not overly excited about giving that metal to her. So I do believe that that is part of the process, at least with cremation, is that the crematorium removes that before giving you back the ashes.
I wonder if there's a black market. Maybe that's the way we can afford to have one of these procedures done. Yes, Susie.
Is an urn, I'm assuming an urn is required or not?
Oh, thank you. That's a great question. We are committed to only having things that are biodegradable. So at this point, the ashes are delivered to St. Giles, and Betsy and I prepare those. We put them into a biodegradable canvas sack, and even then, if the family is wants to have it done this way, we will pour the ashes out of the sack and simply throw the sack away. So our preference is to put the ashes right into the ground. And it's pretty amazing how quickly they integrate with the soil. But the other important aspect is everything in the memorial garden is shared. So nobody owns a certain place that has their name on it, that is their spot. And sometimes I remind folks that, you may choose a spot that's right there next to that neighbor you could never quite get along with, and you'll sort of have the rest of eternity to work out your salvation, as Jesus said. But I think there's something quite beautiful to a shared spot. And my mother's ashes are in the memorial garden next to the pond, and it's amazing how many other people choose a spot very close by to her. And so that, I think, is a special feature of the garden.
And I would add to that, when you are working with the funeral home or the crematorium, you can just let them know that they can just package it in the standard packaging, which is a plastic bag that goes inside a box. You don't need to pay for anything extra. As Lynn said, like, we usually ask the family to give us the ashes before the day of the service so that we can get them into the state they're easiest put into the ground. We take care of all of that, and so you don't need anything extra, if that's helpful.
But if you wanted something special, container for the service, say, that would be perfectly fine. Great question. Yes. Millie?
I'm not up to date on Asheville Mortuary. I think they were inundated with the floods from Hurricane Helene, and I have a contract with them.
And your contract will be honored because it's something that the state keeps record of as well. And they were teamed up with another facility. So even though that physical property did get flooded, they're still going and they're still ready to deliver the services that you contracted with them for.
So, as happened with my husband, they notified, in that case, Asheville Mortuary, and they came and picked up the body and took it to cremate. That would happen again?
Yes.
Okay.
Following on that question is that if you arrange for cremation, mention in the contract that the ashes are to come to Deerfield and contact the chaplain, please.
Mm-hmm.
This communication will help the whole thing greatly.
Thank you. Thanks, Dave. All great questions. Dawn?
Yeah. How much is it to be cremated?
I think cremation, Betsy may be a little bit more up to date. I think it's right around 1,000, 1,500 for the most basic service. And so again, that would be through Asheville Alternative Mortuary Services. That's just straightforward. I sometimes tell people if you're really wanting some good customer service, maybe Gross Funeral Home over the years has been the best. Now, I know we had a resident recently who did not appreciate some of the things that Gross did. I think part of it was they were surprised by how long it took them to come to receive the body. And that can be anywhere from an hour and a half to 2 hours sometimes, especially if it's in the middle of the night. I think that probably is the case with any funeral home that you engage. But
just one thing for those that are veterans. The Veterans Administration pays. It actually, I was surprised, but it pays for the cremation. You just show them your bill and they reimburse you. And we had paid like 6 or 7 years ago, and they still reimbursed us. And they also pay the $600, I don't know if it's still that, for the memorial garden. They reimbursed us for that also. So realize that as a veteran, you do have a way to be paid for all of this.
wow, all great questions. Anything else that people are interested in? I'm sure Betsy and I will be here a little bit longer and could take any questions that you wanted to ask in person. Betsy told you about the sheets that she has for you. There's one here that says Dear Friends on the top, and it tells you how to get in touch with the folks who can do aquamation or human composting or the memorial sanctuary out in Mills River. So if you didn't see that on the back table, I think there are more copies back there or right up here as well. Thanks for coming, folks. It's always a privilege to serve you.
And the host,
What do you have more information about the vinyl records?
I don't, but I can get it to you, Heather. I can get it to you for sure. I probably read that in
okay,
Rolling Stone.
the host, the Health and Wellness Committee, thanks our speakers today, and thanks all the residents who participated. And we look forward to seeing